Hi everyone, my name is Kelahan and I am currently a Master of Social Work intern here at Full Circle Grief Center in Richmond. And today I'm going to be discussing something that we call anticipatory grief. So within that, I'll be talking about, what is anticipatory grief, what can it look like, and finally, how do we cope with it? So to start off, what even is anticipatory grief? What that really means is grieving before a loss has occurred. We see this a lot in the cases of terminal illness, for example. And you know, really, I think what it is the brain's or our person's attempt to protect us or prepare for this inevitable loss. And it has a lot of the same symptoms as grief we might experience after a loss occurs. So, with that in mind, what can it look like? What does grief look like? Um, it covers a lot of different domains. It can impact physical domain. This can manifest as things like sleeplessness or tension in the body, or even things like nausea or difficulty eating. It impacts the psychological domain. So this can look like difficulty concentrating or making decisions, things like rumination, repetitive thoughts, rehearsing the death, and what's going to come afterwards, imagining a future or struggling to imagine the future without your loved one. And then the emotional domain, it can look like feeling helplessness, a certain amount of fear because of the unknown that is coming, anger, sense of unfairness, sadness, crying, anxiety, separation anxiety, anticipatory separation anxiety of being parted with this person or parted from this person, feeling out of control, and then commonly also a certain amount of guilt, going back and forth between wanting as much time as possible with your loved one and then sometimes also wishing for relief and that it may just come to an end, so that that person doesn't have to experience suffering. And then, amongst caregivers also, we do see a lot of compassion fatigue because it's draining to provide care. So guilt related to that sometimes as well. Spiritually, it can look like anything on the spectrum from anger, doubt, questioning of faith because of a sense of unfairness, and or leaning into faith as a support during a really difficult time. All of these things are things that we see in the grief experience after a loss and then also during anticipatory grief. And in this case of anticipatory grief, again, it's really an attempt to protect or to prepare for what's going to happen. And I think it's important to note that research shows us that it doesn't necessarily diminish the amount of grieving that occurs after the loss. So with that in mind, how do we cope with it? How do we cope with, knowing that this loss is going to happen, and still trying to live our day-to-day lives and spend time with the person that we love? So first of all, taking care of yourself. And I know that this is a commonly repeated piece of guidance, but it really is important. And that can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. First and foremost, well, firstly, you know, writing yourself a permission slip to feel however you feel. For some people, physically actually writing this out can be helpful, because it's truly going to cross the spectrum of emotions and it's going to be different from day to day, from moment to moment. Um, it'll be things that are more traditionally associated with grief at times, sadness, anger, and then things, moments of happiness or joy or laughter, and that's also okay. And so, aside from, allowing yourself those feelings, it's important to go back to the basics, attending to the physical needs, making sure you're getting enough sleep as much as you can, eating, hydration, movement. Then the mental and emotional piece of, what are the ways that help me to process what I'm feeling, to identify my emotions, and to express them in a way that's helpful to me. Is it talking to someone? Is it journaling? Is it listening to music? Is it movement, going outside? And then, the social aspects of self-care, connecting with friends and family, spending time doing things that you enjoy. And within this, just continually checking in with yourself and setting realistic goals because, it's easy for me to say you need to be doing all of these things. And also, you're likely, people who are experiencing anticipatory grief are often managing a lot of different things from caregiving to, working a normal job to maybe having children. And, it really needs to be realistic. Even doing small things can be helpful. And so it's important to see like where we can make those small changes even to take care of ourselves. So another piece in terms of being able to care for ourselves is asking for help where possible and leaning on that personal support network. And I recognize that this can be really challenging and can feel like giving up control to a certain extent. And it can also be very helpful and provide space for us to spend the quality time that we want to spend with our loved ones. And then finally, professional support can be really helpful when thinking about how we want to take care of ourselves. So some folks find therapy helpful. Um, if you have engaged in hospice, if your loved one is in hospice, leaning on the hospice team and the resources available through hospice. And some individuals and families work also with folks like end of life doulas. So just looking at what professional resources are available as well. And then, so you have the taking care of yourself piece, right? And then next, another part, I think, of how to cope with anticipatory grief is also taking action. And what do I mean by that? What does that look like? So it's really going to look different for everyone depending on your situation, but depending on your loved one's situation and the nature of your relationship to your loved one. Um, but it's attending to things like practical and legal matters, but then also personal and spiritual needs. And that involves having open conversations with your loved one, either one-on-one or if they're a family member, perhaps in a family setting, about what their goals are for the time that remains. Because it kind of it can give back a sense of, you know, control or empowerment in a situation that otherwise is can be very can be very make us feel like there's nothing that we can do, right? So a way that I've heard it put recently from a chaplain who works here in the Richmond area is redefining hope. So a lot of folks in the situation, especially of, for example, terminal illness, feel like shifting focus away from treatment possibilities is giving up on their loved one. And that's a very understandable feeling. That's a very common feeling. And also, what this person's chaplain was saying is that she often invites people to consider what it could mean for them and their loved one to redefine having hope as being from moving away from having hoping for a prolonged life to expressing hopes and wishes about quality of life in the time that is left. So what moments of beauty and connection does your loved one want to experience and do you want to experience together? And this can look very different this looks very different for different people. It can look like legacy work and working with your loved one to memorialize their life in some way through writing things down, pictures, and recording stories, important milestones, things like that. Engaging also can look like engaging in their favorite activities to the extent that is possible for them. And ultimately, just spending time together, right? I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make things perfect, especially when we feel like we have a finite amount of time. So I only have this much time with I only have, limited amount of time with this person. I want to make sure that that we do everything, that everything is perfect. And that's not it's not possible, right, to achieve that perfect ideal. So just acknowledging that, just being present, just spending time with them, is really monumental in and of itself, right? And ultimately, I want to acknowledge how challenging these things can be, especially with that shift from to acknowledging, what that the loss is going to occur. Um, and I hope also that taking action can bring back again some of that sense of empowerment and choice within a situation that can help make us often feel quite powerless. So we've talked about taking care of yourself, about taking action and having those conversations and understanding your loved one's goals, right? And then another thing that I want to talk about within the coping toolbox is the idea of both and thinking. Because ultimately in grief, I think it's really one of the most important tools that a person can have. And it just means knowing that we can hold two things at the same time, that they can both be true, right? So I can be grieving, and also I am still like, I can acknowledge my grief, I can see that it's there, and also I'm still driving the bus here, and there's still things that I want to do. I want to be present with my loved one. There's things that we need to do together, and I can still enjoy this time in certain ways with them, right? So it's also about, the emotional piece of like, I can be feeling deep sadness and also, love and joy and gratitude for this time with them. And it really gives space for us to give grace to ourselves, because this is you're walking a really challenging and heartbreaking journey when experiencing anticipatory grief. And you and your loved ones still deserve to have moments of connection and beauty during this time. So just as a review of what we've talked about, anticipatory grief is an experience of grief before a loss. It impacts all domains. What I mean by that is the physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual. And when we think about coping, we want to think about ways that we can take care of ourselves, ways that we can take action, and ways that we can engage in thinking about the both and holding two things as true at the same time. So I hope that some of this information, that you find it helpful, and that you can find those moments of beauty and connection with your loved one and find some amount of peace as well. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this video today, and please take care of yourselves. Bye, everyone.